The porcelain cup slipped from my hand, shattering against the tiled floor, the sound echoing like the final punctuation to every silence I had ever forced myself to keep. Mark looked up from his newspaper, his eyes so cold they made the bright kitchen feel dark. "I told you, Rowana, you don't get to choose," he said, grinding out each word before slapping me hard. The blow threw me off balance, and my 8-year-old daughter, Mira, dropped her spoon in fright. Amid the clatter, I saw her eyes wide, terrified, and helpless. In that moment, I understood. My pain was no longer mine alone. It had become something I had to end no matter the cost. I went back to the bedroom in the quiet darkness, my heart still pounding from the command and the slap. Mark was already asleep, his steady snoring dull and heavy like a wall of reeds. I knelt down, lifted the wooden plank beneath the step. The small safe hidden under the floor was as cold as ever. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the surge building inside me. Inside were the things my father had left: handwritten letters, old architectural sketches, a few faded photographs. I traced each paper's edge as though touching the skin of someone long gone. 12 years ago, my father's house had burned down. They said it was an accident, that the fire had devoured both documents and memories. I had lived with that, not knowing long enough to believe it was an unshakable truth. The letter from a law firm made me go still. The first line read, "To Miss Rowana Carter." I kept reading, line by line, as if following a map. My father had made a will, transferring most of his assets into a trust. The sole beneficiary was me. The amount was clear: $9 million, along with ownership of an old construction company in Eugene, Ellison Developments, tied to several major contracts he once handled. Another shock hit me. Why would he leave it all to me when I'd spent years trying to forget the past? Why now, when I was crushed under the hand of a man who wanted to buy out and control everything, would he give me something powerful enough to change my life? I remembered my father's disciplined hands, his eyes over the blueprints, sometimes gentle, sometimes stern, but always filled with quiet faith in the power of repair, both in buildings and in people. He once told me, "Ro, a house can burn down, but the design remains. People can take everything from you, but skill and honor stay." Now I understood. He hadn't only left money. He had left a way back. Mark had never known about this letter. He believed I had nothing of my own, that every dollar sat in the joint account he controlled. He often reminded me, "Your income goes there, I'll handle it." I had obeyed, out of fear and a desperate wish to keep peace for Mira. But as I held that will in my hands, a new sense stirred in me, a cold, precise determination, not for revenge, but to protect my daughter. I put the letters carefully back into the box, but this time I didn't close it right away. I sat beside the wooden floor, the hallway light glinting across my palms like a vow. I started thinking through the next steps: a trustworthy lawyer, legal evidence, time to move before Mark suspected anything. Above all, I had to keep this secret at least until everything was safe. I pulled out my phone, typed a quick message, then stopped. The name Elijah Carter, someone my father used to mention, came to mind. I needed him. But first I had to play the role of the ordinary mother again in the morning, cooking breakfast for Mira, walking her to school as if nothing had happened. I closed the safe, set the plank back in place. The kitchen outside was still asleep. In the fridge, the sandwich box from this morning sat untouched. I drew a deep breath, tasting the salt of tears that hadn't yet fallen, and whispered to myself, "This time, I won't stay silent. This isn't an escape plan, it's a test to find myself again." It took me nearly a week to make everything look normal again. Every morning, I brewed Mark's coffee, smiled at the right moments, and stayed quiet long enough for him to think I had submitted. But inside that house, every move I made had a purpose. Every step, every time I touched my phone, was a piece of the plan to leave that hell behind. The bruises on my wrists still ached, but I didn't apply ointment. I needed to keep the evidence. In the vanity drawer, I hid a small recorder. Whenever Mark lost his temper, I turned it on. Sometimes he slammed doors, shouting because dinner wasn't hot enough. I silently captured every breath, every curse. Later, when he left, I photographed the bruises and sent everything to the encrypted mailbox Elijah had shown me. I only spoke with Elijah at night, once Mark was asleep. His voice over the phone was low and steady, though cautious. "You must be careful, Rowana. He's being watched, your accounts, your calls. If he finds out, he won't let you go." "I understand. But I need to know, Elijah. What you said before about my father, are you sure?" On the other end, there was a pause, then the rustle of papers. "I have reason to believe that fire wasn't an accident. The insurance and company transfer documents all bear Mark's signature 3 days before the explosion." The room seemed to shrink around me. A chill ran through my bones. Mark had known my father long before he met me. Had he come into my life to finish a plan? Elijah continued, his voice lower now. "I know it's hard to accept. But Rowana, you must prepare for the worst. The man you live with isn't violent, he may be a murderer." I ended the call without crying. Everything inside me went numb. Outside the window, wind moved through dew-damp branches, the leaves whispering like distant voices. I sat on the floor, staring at the old photo on the wall, my father and me at my graduation. His eyes were warm, proud, while I looked awkward in an oversized gown. If he were alive, would he even recognize this daughter, the woman crouched in a house owned by the man who might have killed him? I decided I wouldn't leave quietly. I would take the evidence, not of the abuse, but of what Mark had done to my father. The next morning, Mark said he had a shareholders' meeting in Portland. He kissed Mira on the forehead, looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to read me. I kept calm and asked, "Will you be back today?" "Maybe late. Don't lock the door, I hate ringing the bell." I nodded, waiting until his car disappeared before entering the study. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out my father's documents. One by one, I compared signatures, noted dates, and sent everything to Elijah through a secure link. When I reached the final page, I froze a massive wire transfer from Mark's company to a construction group in Mexico, dated exactly 3 weeks before the fire. In the lower corner was the auditor's signature, Harrison Dawson, my father's former associate. My hands tightened on the paper. Dawson had vanished right after the fire, like my father. I remembered what Mark once said after our wedding. "Some people in your line of work aren't smart enough to survive, Rowana." Back then, I thought he meant business competition. Now I understood. As I packed the files into my bag, Mira ran in, hair messy. "Mom, I heard a strange noise in the basement." I froze. Mark had always forbidden us from going down there, saying it was full of old materials. I led Mira to her room, turned on the TV to cover my steps, and quietly went down the stairs. The iron door was slightly ajar. I switched on my flashlight. The beam cut across cardboard boxes, cables, and in the corner, another safe. A yellowed label on top read, "Ellison, Contract, Private Archive." My heart clenched. I didn't have a key, but I'd designed dozens of safes like it. Using a hairpin, I twisted carefully. In 3 minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside, there was no cash, only USB drives, photographs of ledgers, and a brown ink notebook labeled, Project Fireline, 2011. I sat in my home office. The laptop screen's glow reflecting off my tired face. Old files spread across the desk, yellowed pages mixing with the faint scent of pine and ink. Each line, each signature was another piece of a picture I was afraid to see whole. But the more I read, the less I could stop. Date of my father's death, March 15, 2011. Date Mark began buying company shares, March 17, 2011. 2 days. Just 2 days and everything had transferred into his hands legally, neatly, terrifyingly perfect. I reopened the recovered USB file Elijah had restored. The screen flickered, grainy but clear enough to recognize the familiar shape. Mark walked into the construction site wearing a dark jacket, said something to the supervisor, then pointed toward the storage building, the same spot later reported as the fire's point of origin. I had to stop the video midway. My lips trembled, my hands icy cold. I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy, slow, unbearable. 12 years ago, I had screamed myself hoarse beside the ashes people said were my father's remains. For 12 years, Mark had held my hand each time I mentioned him, whispering, "You have to let go of the past. Let go or hide." I opened the desk drawer and took out the small wooden box holding my father's old keys and licenses. A piece of paper slipped from the bottom. It was a shipping invoice for materials transferred from Ellison Developments to Henderson Construction. Signed by Mark Ellison. Date issued only 3 days before the fire. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. Every detail felt like a stone falling into an abyss, but I had to link them together, even knowing that what I might uncover could cost me everything. My phone vibrated. Elijah's name flashed on the screen. His voice was low and urgent when I answered. Rowana, I checked the 2011 shareholder records. There was a middleman who bought shares on Mark's behalf. His name was Dawson, the inspector in charge of the fire site assessment. I gripped the phone tightly. Is he still alive? Disappeared 2 years later. No further investigation. It looks like everything was shut down from the inside. I stayed silent for a long moment, listening to the wind outside the window. Then Elijah spoke again, his tone uneasy. Rowana, I know you want the truth, but if I'm right, Mark did this to take over the company and maybe more. I cut him off. Elijah, I need to know everything. Even the things you think I shouldn't. After the call ended, I sat still, staring outside. A thin rain covered the street, headlights reflecting off each droplet like shards of glass. Every drop carried a memory: Mark's first embrace, his promise that he would always protect me. Now, I saw it all as a careful curtain hiding a long calculated plan. I stood and walked to my father's old filing cabinet. The bottom drawer was jammed. I had to pull hard to open it. Inside, beyond the dust and a few sketches, was a small sealed envelope labeled, "For Rowana, open when you're brave enough." My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a short letter, my father's handwriting as steady as ever. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I once believed Mark was talented, but lately I've realized he doesn't want partnership, he wants everything. If anything happens to me, find Elijah Carter. He knows how to protect you. At the bottom was his signature, with a notary seal from a law office in Eugene dated March 12, 2011, 3 days before he died. I sank into the chair, tears spilling not from weakness, but from the realization that the entire picture had come together. Every path led back to Mark. The company, the fire, even his proposal years later, everything was part of a careful, deliberate chain. I looked around the room, everything familiar suddenly felt foreign. My father's desk, the wedding photo of Mark and me, the stack of files I once took pride in. Everything here was a relic of faith betrayed. The sound of the front door made me flinch. Mira's small voice called out, "Mom, Dad's home." I quickly stuffed the envelope and USB into the hidden compartment behind the cabinet, closing it fast. By the time I stepped into the living room, Mark was hanging his coat on the chair, smiling as if nothing had changed. "Still working late?" he asked, his tone gentle but his eyes probing. "I had some designs to finish." "You're home earlier than I thought. Meeting got cancelled." "You don't seem surprised." The comment made my heart race. I realized Mark was testing me. He was still the one in control, always measuring how much I knew. I smiled, stepped back slightly, and replied calmly, "I'm surprised Portland didn't keep you for a few more days." He tilted his head, studying me for a long moment, then gave a half smile. "Don't ever talk to Elijah Carter again." The words dropped like a blade of ice. I stood still, not asking how he knew. I nodded, pretending not to understand. But inside, a new fear spread. Mark knew, and he was warning me that the real game had begun. In the following days, the house grew so suffocating that even breathing carried the metallic taste of fear. Mark no longer yelled without reason or lashed out violently, but the stillness around him was far more dangerous. He watched me, every glance, every gesture, like a predator patiently waiting for its prey to step into the trap. My phone's signal often cut out for a few seconds, then reconnected. My email showed messages I hadn't sent, bearing my name as the sender. I knew Mark had hired someone to monitor me. He wanted me to feel I had no privacy, no escape. But after living in fear for so long, I'd learned that when fear crosses its limit, it becomes strength. So I began to play my part. Each morning, I brewed his coffee, listening to his smooth, perfect lines, as if he were still the man everyone admired. "Are you still upset about the other day?" he asked, his tone light, as though nothing had happened. I shook my head softly. "Just tired." He rested a hand on my shoulder, a faint smile touching his lips though his eyes stayed cold. I only want to take care of you, Rowana. Don't make me doubt my kindness. Kindness. I almost laughed. That word, from his mouth, sounded like mockery. At night, while he worked in his office, I sat on the couch with Mira, reading her fairy tales. Each time Mark's voice echoed from upstairs, she flinched, her tiny hand gripping mine tightly. "Mom, why is Dad always mad?" she whispered, her voice trembling like wind. I kissed her hair and murmured, "Because he's forgotten how to love, sweetheart." But I haven't. That night, after she fell asleep, I went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. The steady sound of running water helped calm me. Each plate, each glass I cleaned carefully as if washing away my old life. I opened the top cabinet, took out Mira's lunch bag for the next morning, and quietly slipped a few thin folded papers inside, copies of contracts, transfer records, and photos of Mark's documents. Elijah had arranged for someone he trusted to receive them at Mira's friend's house. I sealed the bag, dried my hands, and smiled for the first time in days. When I turned around, Mark was leaning against the doorway. He said nothing, watched me. The yellow light cast half his face in shadow, as if even the light was afraid to touch his real self. "What's making you smile?" he asked slowly. "I was thinking about taking Mira to school tomorrow," I replied, keeping my tone even. Mark stepped closer, his finger tracing lightly along my chin, a gesture that looked tender but made my skin crawl. "Don't do anything that would disappoint me, Rowana. I don't like the feeling of betrayal." He walked away, and I only dared to exhale once I heard his door close. By day, I played the obedient wife, grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning. By night, I gathered evidence piece by piece. Each time I sent something to Elijah, I felt as though I reclaimed a fragment of my lost soul. But the more I did, the more cautious Mark became. One evening he came home earlier than usual. I was reviewing my father's data folder when I heard the car in the driveway. My heart stopped. I shut the laptop, pulled the USB out, and stuffed it into my pocket. The door opened, Mark entered, his smile icy. "What are you doing in my office?" "Looking for the utility bills," I said, my palms sweating. He glanced around, his eyes sweeping the desk, stopping at a half-open drawer. Without another word, he closed it, then patted my shoulder lightly. "Don't dig into things you don't understand, Rowana. It's not good for you." I nodded, but inside I knew he was starting to suspect. That night, Mira woke from a nightmare. She clung to me, eyes wide, voice shaking. "Mom, I dreamed Daddy was yelling and then I couldn't find you." I hugged her tight, guilt rising like a tide. I tried to protect her, but each day in this fear was carving marks into her tiny heart. I whispered. "As much to her as to myself, I swear, Mira, even if I have to burn the past, I'll get us out of here." The next morning, after Mark left for work, I drove Mira to school and stopped a little before the gate, watching closely. A gray car was parked across the street, engine running. As Mira walked into the yard, I saw the window roll down, a strange man watching her. I turned the car immediately, drove to her friend's house, pretending I'd forgotten to drop off something. Elijah was waiting there. He took the bag I'd sent through Mira's friend, nodding slightly. "I got it. But Rowana, you need to be more careful. Someone's watching." "I know. Mark hired them." "I need a little more time, Elijah, a few more days." He looked at me for a long moment, worry and admiration mixed in his eyes. "You're playing a game of chess where every move could cost you everything." I smiled, though my insides trembled. "At least this time, I'm the one with the white pieces." When I returned home, the landline was ringing. I picked up. Mark's voice came through, calm and even. "You stopped by Mira's school today." I dropped off her lunch. "Why?" The air went still. Then he said, "Nothing. I wanted to know you're still being good." The click of the receiver cut through the quiet like a blade. I felt the walls, the ceiling, even the air closing in. But in that same moment, I realized the more cornered I became, the clearer I saw the truth about the perfect man I once loved. And from that darkness, a spark began to rise, the fire of resistance, flickering to life. That afternoon when Elijah called, I was sitting by the window, trying to mend Mira's small school uniform. The needle trembled in my hand, and his voice on the line made me stop mid-stitch. Rowana, I confirmed something. The fire records from 2011 were tampered with. The person who signed off on the conclusion electrical malfunction accident was Richard Ellison, Mark's father. The room suddenly felt cold. I set the needle down and looked outside. The maple leaves had started to turn. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful for the news I had heard. Elijah went on, his tone slow and heavy. I also found the original report, the one that wasn't altered. It clearly states that the fire started in the sealed material storage area. But that report was pulled from the file 2 days later. The person in charge then was also Richard. I heard the needle hit the floor. There was an empty space between my throat and my heart, one that no words could fill. Elijah, are you saying Mark and his father might have? I stopped, my voice rasping. Staged the whole thing, he cut in, his voice steady. I'm sorry to say this, but every trail leads back to them. Your father didn't die in an accident. He was murdered. I closed my eyes, but the air refused to reach my lungs. It felt like my body was trying to swallow a truth it couldn't digest. After a long moment I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice, they killed him, and then married me, to make the assets legal. Elijah said nothing. That pause weighed heavier than any confirmation. I hung up and walked slowly to the mirror. The glass was fogged from the steam of untouched tea. The woman staring back had a pale face, dark circles and cracked lips, but her eyes were different. I placed my hand on the mirror and murmured, he took my father, his career, even his name. But I'll take everything back. When Mira walked in, I quickly wiped my tears. She handed me a drawing. 3 people, her, me, and a man in the middle, smiling. Mom, this is Dad from before. I drew him from the old photo in your drawer, she said innocently. I hugged her, breathing in the scent of her soapy hair, and my heart clenched. My father once told me, if you ever lose your way, look into a child's eyes. They don't know how to lie. I knew I had found my direction again. Night fell and Mark hadn't come home. I sat at my desk, reopening the old files. My father's handwriting appeared clear, as if he were still speaking to me. In the margin of one blueprint was a note. Never sign a contract if Ellison is behind it. My heart pounded. My father had known. He'd suspected them and died for it. When I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway, I quickly hid the papers and went down to the kitchen as if nothing had happened. He came in, the smell of expensive cologne mixed with cigarette smoke. His eyes swept around the room before settling on me. Still awake. I couldn't sleep, I said evenly. Mark poured himself a glass of liquor, stirring it lazily with his finger. Something on your mind, Rowana? You've been strange lately. Maybe I'm trying to remember the man I once thought was good. And, he asked, narrowing his eyes. Maybe he never existed. Mark slammed the glass onto the table, the liquid splashing onto the cloth. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. You're crossing the line. I backed away, but didn't break eye contact. Or are you afraid I'll find out what you've done? For a second, I saw shock flicker in his eyes. He tried to recover his calm, but his voice trembled slightly. You've been reading too many novels, Rowana. Maybe, I said with a faint smile. But fiction lies less than real life. He turned and walked out. The door closed softly, but I knew he wouldn't sleep. Neither would I. When dawn came, I was still alone in the dim light. I opened my notebook and wrote down everything Elijah had said, dates, names, timelines that aligned too perfectly. My hands trembled, but the lines stayed straight. A text arrived, short and sharp. Rowana, be careful. They're looking for you. I looked out the window and saw a gray SUV parked not far from the house, the same one, with the same man in dark glasses. I closed the curtains, steadied my hands, and opened the cabinet. Inside the small box were copies of the files and an old photo. My father shaking hands with a copy it. Gray-haired man Richard Ellison. Both smiling, friendly like longtime colleagues. On the back, my father had written, trusting this man was my first and last mistake. Everything was clear now. My father had warned me. I hadn't understood in time. The truth was no longer a haunting, it was the beginning of a confrontation. That morning the sky was a pale gray, as if dust had settled over fate itself. I stood before the mirror, straightened my collar, and forced my face into calm. The reflection showed no trace of the fearful woman from before, only me, eyes sharp and cold. Mark called from the living room, his voice smooth as always. "Are you ready, Rowana? Don't be late, I hate waiting." I answered quietly, "Give me 1 minute." Beneath my coat, a small recorder rested against my chest. In my purse, a silver fountain pen hid a tiny camera. Elijah had arranged everything: the placement of the devices, the live transmission to the police. I only had one task: to make Mark say what we both knew was true. As the car moved, I looked out the window. The trees lining the road stood still, their leaves unmoving, as if holding their breath. Mark drove, glancing at me from time to time. "I'm glad you finally understand," he said, voice light with arrogance. "We can end this peacefully." I gave a faint smile, tightening my grip on my bag. "I want Mira to be safe." "Good," he said, smirking. "Don't make me change my plans." His office building sat on the outskirts of Eugene, once my father's company headquarters. The glass doors reflected two figures, a tall man with a confident stride, and a thin woman whose eyes no longer wavered. When the elevator stopped on the 9th floor, I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest. Elijah's last message flashed on my phone. "We're in position. Act natural. Just make him talk." The meeting room was wide and bright, with glass walls opening to section the city. The midday light made everything look deceptively calm. Mark placed the divorce papers before me, flipping through them like a ritual. "You need to sign here, and your father's shares will transfer to me. In return, I won't touch Mira, and you'll have enough to live comfortably." I glanced over the papers, my voice even. "I want to hear your promise again, Mark. Clearly." He looked up, squinting, then laughed. "You're as suspicious as your father." He also wanted to hear my promise. I stopped breathing. The air in the room vanished. My voice was quiet. And then, Mark leaned forward, his tone low, mocking and deadly. "Then he learned that sometimes, the smartest people die because they trust the wrong man." I stared at him, my smile fading. "You killed my father, didn't you?" Mark laughed, but his eyes flashed like a blade. "Killed? That's too harsh." I removed an obstacle. He leaned back, took a sip of water, and said the words that shattered the air. "I took care of your father. Did you really think I couldn't take care of you?" In that instant, I could hear my heartbeat between the faint static of the recorder. Everything inside me broke and came alive at once. I stood, my voice trembling from control. "You'll never touch Mira, Mark, I swear it." He shot up, his eyes blazing. "You think you can fight me? Everything you have exists because of me. The house, the company, even the name you carry." I stepped back, my fingers brushing the bag where the pen was transmitting every word. Somewhere, Elijah and the police were listening. Mark lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. "You forget, I can make things disappear faster than anyone notices." I met his eyes, unflinching. "No, Mark. This time, you're the one who'll disappear." The door burst open with shouted commands. "Police! Don't move!" Voices burst through the door. Mark aimed at me. The shot sliced past my cheek and buried into the wall. Officers tackled him, the pistol skidding across the floor. Elijah reached me, breath tight. "We've got him." I stood there, my heart pounding wildly, my legs trembling but holding. Elijah came over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes a mix of worry and admiration. "You did it, Rowana." I looked around the room, the place where all of Mark's secrets and sins had been dressed in luxury and power. Now it was nothing but wreckage, a spilled glass of water, scattered documents, and a man in handcuffs shouting meaningless words. The police led him away, their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Hours later, I opened the door of our apartment. Mira ran into my arms. "Mom, do we still have to run?" I kissed her forehead, brushing her soft hair. "No, sweetheart. Now we walk toward the light." Outside, the wind rushed through the trees, carrying the damp scent of an oncoming storm. I stepped out of the headquarters, the afternoon sun spilling across my face, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without fear. Smoke rolled under the ceiling tiles. Mark, still handcuffed, had thrown a curtain into the flames, trying to erase everything: the evidence, the guilt, and whatever was left of his humanity. "Mark, stop!" Elijah shouted, rushing forward with 2 officers. Mark turned, sweat and smoke streaking his face in black smudges. "You don't understand. It's all mine." I stepped back as the heat clawed at my skin. "No, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "What you wanted wasn't wealth, it was control. But you forgot something: power ends when fear ends." His eyes flared. He stumbled backward into the burning curtain. Officers pulled him down as the fire rose, consuming the office walls. We pushed through the rear service exit. Cold air slammed against my face as alarms shrieked behind us. "Go, Rowana!" Elijah yelled. I turned once through the smoke. I saw Mark pinned to the floor, still shouting meaningless words. The headquarters burned, orange light twisting across the glass like veins of fire. It wasn't the end of Mark's empire, it was the end of the fear that had owned my life. We stood across the street, the heat still rippling in the air. Mira buried her face in my chest, sobbing soundlessly. I stroked her hair, my voice calm though my eyes were blurred with tears. "It's over now, sweetheart. It's over." Police dragged Mark outside, his hands cuffed, his face blackened with soot, his clothes torn to shreds. He still tried to turn back, muttering incoherently. A strong gust swept past, carrying tiny flakes of ash that landed in my hair, in my open palm. They disintegrated like dust, fragile and lonely, but I knew, not everything had been burned away. Some things would remain forever: the truth and the pain. Elijah walked up, placing his hand on my shoulder. His voice was hoarse from the smoke. "You did the right thing, Rowana. Even if he lived, he wouldn't be the man you once knew." I looked at him and nodded softly. "I wasn't trying to save him, Elijah. I didn't want hatred to define the rest of my life." In the distance, fire trucks blared. Red and blue lights flickered, reflecting off the wet pavement. Neighbors had come running, whispering in shock. I couldn't hear them. All I heard was the crackling of burning wood, the final heartbeats of something consuming itself to dust. Mira looked up at me, her eyes wet. "Mom, is Dad burned?" I brushed her cheek and whispered, "Sometimes, people don't burn because of fire, they burn from what they've done." The night wind carried the smell of ash through my hair, clinging to my clothes. I stood watching the old house collapse, each falling wall like the final page of a book read to its end. In the dim flicker of emergency lights, I saw my father in my memory, his steady hands, his gentle eyes as he taught me how to draw my first straight line. He once told me, "Every structure has a breaking point. You have to know when to leave before it drags you down with it." Now I had left, not by running, but by rising from the ashes. I wasn't afraid anymore. As the flames died out, leaving only a charred frame against the damp earth, Mira gripped my hand. "Mom, where will we go now?" I looked at the road ahead, long, misty, leading toward the small town lights that shimmered at the foot of the hill. "Somewhere with no smoke," I said softly, my voice strangely peaceful. "Somewhere you can breathe without bowing your head." We walked on, our shadows stretching across the wet street. Behind us, the last flame flickered out, leaving only the faint scent of smoke, the smell of a new beginning born from ashes. October in Eugene carried a strange kind of quiet, not peace, but the stillness that comes after a storm has passed. I sat in Elijah's office, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The pale light from the window fell across the files spread before me. Elijah slid a folder toward me, his voice low. "These came from a bank in Zurich. An old account under your father's company name, opened in 2010. And this is what they found in the safe deposit box." He took out a USB drive and plugged it into the computer. The screen flickered, and then a blurred image appeared. A familiar voice filled the room, rough, warm, calm in a way that pierced straight through me. "If you're watching this, Rowana, it means you're strong enough to know the truth. Don't trust anyone from the Ellison family." My father sat in the frame, his hair more silver now, his eyes looking straight into the lens. That gaze reached across 12 years and touched me as if he were right there. "They want something I never meant to give them: the company, the assets, and the family's honor. Mark Ellison will come for you. He doesn't love you, Rowana. He'll use you as the key to legitimize control. But I believe one day you'll understand." I didn't know when I'd started crying. Elijah's voice came softly beside me, careful not to break the fragile silence. He knew everything about Mark, about what was coming. On the screen, my father continued, slower now. I transferred all the assets into a trust fund under your name. But you can only claim it once you free yourself from that dangerous marriage. Rowana, your strength isn't in what I've left behind, it's in your courage to live. To walk away. If you've made it here, it means you've already done it. The video ended with his faint smile, the one I remembered when he used to rest his hand on my shoulder after a hard test. The screen went black, and the only sound left was the clock ticking in the office. I reached out, touching the screen. My voice shook. Elijah, my father knew. Every detail, every step. He saw it all before it happened. And he left you a way out, Elijah said gently. This trust account is locked behind multiple protections. No one but you can open it. Have you read all of it? I asked. I only went through the first section, he said, flipping a page and pointing to the last line. But there's this note. Don't seek revenge. Use what remains to rebuild. That simple sentence made my chest tighten. All this time I had only thought about fighting back, about making Mark pay. But my father, he had never taught me how to destroy, only how to rebuild. Elijah handed me a sheet of paper. This is the transfer order. If you sign, the entire trust fund will be under your control. Elijah, have you ever thought, maybe my father never meant to leave money? But a chance? He looked surprised. A chance for what? A chance to start over. To stop living under his shadow or Mark's. To choose my own life. His expression softened, and he stepped back, leaving me alone with the paper. I signed. When the ink dried, I knew the road behind me was gone, but another had opened. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my father's memorial stood. The rain hadn't stopped, droplets slid down the cold stone. I knelt and placed my hand on his name, just a plaque, since his body had never been found. You were right, I whispered. It took me years to realize that some people only truly die when we stop fearing them. Thank you, Dad, for believing I would survive. A cold wind swept by, brushing my hair, carrying the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. In that moment, I felt as though he answered not with words, but with the gentle silence of someone finally at peace. On the way home, I turned on the radio. The announcer mentioned the upcoming trial of Mark Ellison. In the rearview mirror, I caught my reflection, eyes no longer tired. Everything my father left behind wasn't money or a will. It was a reminder that even in loss, we can still choose how to move forward. I turned down the small road leading home, where Mira was waiting. The new apartment sat on a hillside, overlooking rain-soaked fields. When I opened the door, she ran into my arms, holding a crumpled drawing. Me and Mom and Grandpa in the clouds. I smiled, tears falling into her hair. In that moment, I knew I had walked the path my father meant for me. He wanted me to live, and I was doing that, every day, surrounded by my daughter's warm breath and the memory of a father who had died but never really left me. A year passed. Spring returned, laying thin sunlight across the slope behind the house. I still woke early out of habit, brewed coffee, opened the window for fresh air. The scent of new grass drifted in with Mira's laughter from the backyard, a sound so pure I realized it was something I'd forgotten. What it felt like to truly live. The little house I chose stood apart from town, 2 bedrooms, a wooden porch, and a backyard full of lavender, Mira's favorite. Here, there were no more shouts, no slamming doors, no heavy footsteps. Only birds at dawn and wind threading through the pines. Most of the trust fund my father left, I turned into the Carter Foundation, an organization helping women and children escape domestic violence. Elijah was the first to agree to serve as legal advisor, while I managed operations. On the day we opened, he said only one thing: I think Mr. Carter would be proud of you. Deep down, I knew pride wasn't what my father wanted. He only needed to know that I was living the way he'd hoped, dare to begin again, even when everything seems to have burned down. The press still hadn't stopped mentioning the Ellison case. Sometimes I caught my face on TV with headlines like, "The wife who brought down a powerful killer," or "From victim to founder of a humanitarian fund." I refused every interview. When reporters came, Elijah would smile and say, "She's not looking for fame." There were still nights I woke not from nightmares, but from the sound of memory, the flick of a lighter, the crackle of wood in the red blaze that once consumed everything. Yet instead of fear, I watched the fire in the fireplace, feeling its quiet cleansing. The flames that once took my father and destroyed Mark's house had also freed me from the darkness. Maybe my father was right. Fire isn't evil, you need to know when to watch it and when to walk through it. One April afternoon, Mira and I attended the Foundation's first meeting. The small room in the community center held a dozen women, faces marked by old scars, both visible and hidden. They looked at me as if I had stepped out of their own stories. I didn't lecture or teach. I simply sat down and told them about the morning I decided to leave my old house, my voice calm, no longer trembling. When I finished, the woman nearest to me said softly, "I thought I was weak. Maybe I never had the chance to be strong." I took her hand, feeling warmth pass between us like a quiet current. That night, when I came home, Mira had fallen asleep on the sofa, her comic book still open. I covered her with a blanket, then picked up the old recorder, the same one I'd once used to capture Mark's voice. Now I kept it for another purpose. I set it on the table and pressed the red button. My voice filled the room, gentle but firm. They say fire only destroys, but I've seen it light the way. The first fire took my father. The second gave me back myself. The room was silent except for the wind slipping through the window frame, carrying the lavender scent from the garden. I opened the window wider and looked at Mira sleeping peacefully, her face glowing under the soft porch light. She was growing fast, her eyes bright and strong, nothing like the child who once feared shouting. The next day, a group of college volunteers visited the foundation. They wanted to film a short video about the women we'd helped. I agreed only on one condition, that it would end with an image of Mira. "She's the only reason I still believe in light," I said. They nodded. By evening, the camera rolled, capturing Mira running through the grass in front of our house. She laughed, her curly hair gleaming in the sunlight. I stood on the porch, watching quietly, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. The sun's glow fell over us, a soft gold like a blessing from the past. Elijah arrived, holding a new proposal for the foundation. He set the folder on the table and said gently, "I think you should write your own book, Rowana. Not about Mark or the case, about how a woman can walk through hell and still keep her kindness." I smiled and shook my head. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to write it all down. You were brave enough to live it. Let time write the rest for you." The sun dipped behind the hills, washing the sky in pale red. Mira kept running, her arms stretched wide as if to embrace the sunset. Outside, night was falling, but inside our little house on the hill, I knew I had finally found what my father said was most precious: freedom. Not to forget, but to begin again, peacefully and fully alive. Sometimes I still wonder, if my father were alive, would he recognize the woman I've become? Maybe he would only smile, like he used to, and say, "You found your light again." Life isn't always fair, but it always gives us the chance to stand back up. If this story touched you, please like, follow, and subscribe so we can share more journeys together. And you, what moment made you realize you were stronger than you ever thought?